thing about the quality of this service that happens before I speak and afterwards is that I can come up here and totally blow it, and you guys will still have a good day. So that eliminates a lot of pressure. My name is Kelly, if we've not met before, and I'm glad that you're here today, and I'm glad that I'm here today. Now, in full transparency, when we think about the Unity 12 powers, and we've been going through those for weeks now, I've lost count. When it came to order, that was not one that I jumped at. And to be honest with you, it wasn't even one I was selected, it was the date that was left. Well, what I love is like already we've heard of expressions and people in celebrations talk about divine order. Now, if you have come from a particular, let's say, religious or military background, order might be a word that doesn't sit well with you. And to be honest with you, I fall into that group. I like sometimes the word order can give visions of constraint, being constricted, compromised, unable to be who we want and what we want. And so the challenge is for us to see this in a new and different light if we do come with a perspective or a background to this that is challenging. I still don't like the word order, and I really didn't come up with a better word, so we're just going to stick with it, and hopefully if it's triggering to us, we can have some redemption and healing this morning. Because really, healing, if you're triggered by something, the absence of it does not promote healing. It's just absence of the trigger. It's just avoidance. And so if we are triggered by something, it really takes an exposure to it to see where we are in our healing spectrum and where we need to go. Now that assessment, that evaluation that we often have to do in times like this really isn't fun, and that's why we prefer avoidance, and we prefer to be in situations where this word's not mentioned or that topic's not discussed. But it doesn't bring about healing, does it? It's just an avoidant environment. So we're going to jump into this real quick and look at what unity, the power, what it says divine order is. Now, we've been in this reel-to-reel series where there's been film clips showed every week. And when I viewed the suggested film and the suggested clip, which was Mary Poppins from the 1960s, Dick Van Dyke, and that suggested clip, as in that scene they talked about the Boston Tea Party and the indigenous people who were dressed as indigenous throwed over a ship full of tea, they used the phrase, Red Indian Savages, in the movie. Now, this was the 60s, and we know what was being produced. But I was like, I ain't using it. So, today, instead of watching something, I'm going to invite you to use your imagination. And we can see something in our mind. Now, what I'd like you to think about for a moment, and at the risk of really getting you irritated, is think about bin traffic. I don't know about you guys, after driving it every day, all over town, all over the county. Think about bin traffic when the stoplights are out. What goes from being hectic without the order of the stoplights and the sequence of movement becomes chaotic, doesn't it? Now, I don't know if you were like some of us. A few weeks ago, when the new traffic pattern was initiated, see, I don't have to finish the sentence. When the new traffic pattern was finalized on Highway 97, and DOT, if you're watching this morning, we love the bypass. We're glad it's in place. We're glad you've done it so quickly. But some of us found ourselves heading north on 97 and realized we were on our way to Redmond and that we needed to do a U-turn. And you may have seen on the media, the traffic cams are showing lines of people stringing up to make U-turns. And everybody's like, there's no signs. And I thought, there's no signs. So the next day I went through there, and I'm like watching, because they said there were signs. Go through there, and sure enough, there's this big-ass, excuse my language, big orange sign that has like the letters, that flash and change, and I don't know what the name of it is, but this big sign on the side of Highway 97 that gave instructions of what to do to go to a particular location. The sign was there, but there was so much stuff happening right there in that area, so much stuff around it, our brains could not process that sign. There was so much chaos that we found ourselves, new traffic pattern, traffic really close to us, construction equipment, bridges, big mountains, piles of debris all around us. In the midst of that chaos, we couldn't process that sign even when we did see it. So let's think about order as the lack of chaos. Does that make sense? Not constrictive, restrictive, not oppressive, not controlling. And we think about divine order. One of Unity's ministers, Stephanie C., she writes, divine order is our ability to sort out what's important and what's not. See, when we're driving up 97 in the midst of chaos, we couldn't see that sign that was very important. We see it, but we could not process it. Too much visual stimulation. More than we could process. Real order is never imposed from the outside, but comes from within when we get our priorities in order. Trust. Trust is a crux of being in divine order. It's about trusting that the universe knows what it's doing. Charles Fillmore, who's one of the founders, he and his wife Myrtle, who are founders of the Unity spiritual movement, which really took Christianity and the scriptures and put it in this mystical, metaphysical perspective, which is what many of us believe what was originally intended with Jesus' teachings. Charles describes that being in divine order, that it's a constant peaceful place. We're in the flow. He writes that our minds are open to the every movement of the divine, describing it as a release of the outcomes, not limiting the divine or ourselves. Now, as Claire shared, and if you didn't know, Unity, the board, Reverend Jane, and I engaged in significant conversations first half of this year about coming in as a senior minister as Reverend Jane starts to transition out. I was excited. We were excited. It wasn't issue or challenge free, as nothing is. Transition and change, we humans, we really don't like that very well. Because if we're on autopilot, we don't have to think, we don't have to grow, we don't have to do anything. Everything's really easy. And as we went through this process, what started off as a real strong green light, at one point shifted to a yellow light. That's how I was feeling. And so that got my attention a little bit. Then that yellow light went to a red light. And it was in this, if we want to use the word intuition, source, spirit, God, universe, my spirit guides, whatever guiding me. In me, there was this sense of lack of peace about proceeding. It was a sensation, and I'll even use the word voice, even though it wasn't verbal, that I have been familiar with, both in guiding and in correcting a course. And I was like, what's going on? This doesn't make sense. And at that point, it would have been very easy for me to start to intellectualize, get very cerebral, and start to figure out, well, what's wrong? What don't I like? What is popping up? Because then once I identified it, I could defend it, I could create a solution, I could work around it. And I had to work really, really hard and be diligent about not doing that and staying connected to source and in this, because it really didn't matter why. What was important was I was sensed that I was receiving that message. It didn't make sense. And to be just really transparent with you guys, I grieved it. I grew up in a household where that was chaotic at times. There was a lack of order. And in that, I grew up in an environment of being a people pleaser, for acceptance, for affirmation, and to have to make the phone calls that I made. It was really hard. And to say, I can't proceed. Because I hate disappointing people. I knew I would still be loved and be accepted. But people had worked really hard, and we were creating this plan and path forward and trying to make things work. And I honored people's dedication, I honored their diligence, I honored their determination. And the last thing I wanted to do was let them down. But I knew that the call I had to make was going to disappoint people. It was going to cause the board to have to go to a plan B. It affected a lot of people, not just me. But it was in trusting this nudge, this guidance, this prompting from Spirit, or my Spirit guides, and not trying to figure it out as to why, but just honor the voice. Which, if you've been there, you know it's really hard, because we really like to fix stuff, especially when it's something different than what we desired, what we expected, what we wanted. Reverend Stephanie, in her description of divine order, she said, trust is the crux of being in divine order. It's about trusting that the universe knows what it's doing, even better than I do, which is really hard for me to believe at times. Charles Fillmore again said, described it as releasing the outcome, not limiting the divine or ourselves. Even when it's tough, even when it's not wanted. And for us to get to places to do that, it means that we have to be familiar with that voice. We have to be familiar with that relationship with ourselves and our intuition and our spirit guides. We have to know what they're talking about and trust that they actually might know better than I do. And that requires nurturing that relationship. And for a lot of us, that might look like meditation. It might be being in nature. It might be coming to sound baths. It might be connecting to your creative flow and outlet, whatever that is. Because I believe we're most divine-like. We as fractals of the divine, who are divine, but are part of the divine, we are most in our divinity when we are creating, because the divine created. And so we are genuinely reflecting the divine when we are in that creative flow. Do you understand? And if those of you who are artists in the room, you totally get it. And for those of us who thought for a lot of years we're not artists, we don't have that, you're wrong. You just haven't quite yet figured out what it is. So it's in that nurturing of relationship with Source and our spirit guides that we know that voice when it gets to the crucial part. we don't rely on what we often do, our intellect. I have a master's degree from England. I was accepted at Oxford to pursue my PhD. It's easy for me to go to a very intellectual place. But when this red light popped up, I really worked hard not to, because I felt like it was better for me and it was better for you that I not. And the fact that it didn't make sense and I didn't understand it was really irrelevant. It's that trust. But we have to know who we're trusting. And we have to have a trust that there's awareness and a perspective that's greater than our own. Now, we are taught, and culture teaches us, that we are figuring out we're to be problem solvers. So it's really countercultural and really counter to what we've been conditioned to not engage mentally, cerebral, but to go into that place of quiet meditation and trying to trust source. But if you're like me, sometimes it gets like, well, is that just me or is that source? Now, sometimes I don't know. I mean, if I'm honest, I'm not. And that's where it's like if we trust in the small steps, then when we get to the big steps, we can look back at the small steps and say, oh yeah, it was this. So while I'm talking about me and this unity experience this morning, what I really hope is we gather that it's really about ourselves and our connection with Source and cultivating and nurturing that. That in divine order, trust is the highest priority. But it has to be nurtured, it has to be fed, it has to be cultivated. Nate mentioned the Olympics earlier. And I'll be honest with you guys, I can't really watch them that much anymore. Part of it's the commercialism. And I'm glad to hear they're streaming now. But the last time I really watched the Olympics was 8 years ago, in 2016. And I was working with refugees on this island off the coast of Turkey. And it was an island where refugees were coming to. It's about a 45-minute boat ride, a couple miles from Turkey to this island that was part of a Greek island chain. Now, put it in perspective, it's 45 minutes to Turkey, it's 11 hours by ferry back to Greece. So high in the Mediterranean Sea, it's no longer the Mediterranean Sea, it's the Aegean Sea. And was on this island and was with a group of refugees and volunteers. That's what I was doing there, working with refugees. And this island was like one of the first points from Syrian and Iraqi refugees when they were fleeing the war with ISIS and coming across. UN had 3 camps there. And we were watching and pulling for somebody that you've probably never heard of. Her name was, you might have heard her story, but her name was Ursa Madridi. You see, just a year before, she and her family left Syria. They got in a boat to make that crossing in the night, and the motor stopped. Ursa was a swimmer. She had been trying in Syria to get into the Olympics. She's in this boat at night, and the motor stops. She and her sister get in the water, then started towing this boat of refugees. And I'm sitting there with refugees cheering for this woman in the Olympics. You might wonder which country she swam for. It was called ROT, the Refugee Olympic Team. She had no country support, no country sponsorship. she and others were deemed by the Olympic Committee to be representatives of the refugees. She didn't make it far in the Olympics. You probably didn't see her. She didn't finish well after the quarterfinals. But to sit there with refugees and have them cheer for one of them was an amazing event. And anything watching the Olympics less than that now, it's just a little bit less. It was a lot less. Sorry, you guys. I've still got a lot of trauma. Thank you, Dick. I'm sweating. Tears are running down my face. Gel's probably going to run down my eyes, and I'll start burning here in a moment. I don't know if this is true or not, but we were told that she was not scheduled to be in that dinghy, that boat that night. That she was scheduled, had paid smugglers to be in another boat, and it was full. And she couldn't make it. So her family was separated in that crossing. But it seems like there was divine order that put her in the boat where the engine was going to fail. This is the crux, really the crux, and the importance of us being in divine order, because this world and this planet needs us greatly now. And the boat that we need to tow is the raising of our vibration and human consciousness. And right now, everything is so divided, and it's either this side or that side. And the world does not need any more people in fight energy or fight mode, because that vibration is down low. Yes, we can advocate, we can educate, we can assist, which is a very different vibrational energy than fight. Does that make sense? And what this planet needs now, and what the species needs, is our vibration being raised. That means us staying in a place of joy, not being drugged down or bogged down by the events on the media, or getting polarized, even if we agree or disagree with one particular side or the other. Because we don't need more fights. What we need are people who are holding space and the vibration and keeping us up. This is the boat we have to tow. And it's up to us to do it. Individually, within ourselves, with our homes, with our broader community, and with the world. So I encourage you to think about divine order, about being tuned in and tapped in. I don't know if you're familiar with Abraham Hicks. She always says tuned in, tapped in, and turned on. That's where we need to be so we can tow our boat and make a difference in this world around us that desperately needs it. Thank you, and namaste.